Good Sunday morning. I'm Jaden Jefferson, and welcome to this week's Community Focus. I'm right now joined by Amanda Wilson, who is the Youth Housing Initiative Director at the Ohio Homelessness Coalition on Housing as well. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So let's first talk about youth homelessness, because this was the focus of a story I did this week, and this is an issue that I don't think too many people know about. So talk about youth homelessness.
So the thing that is difficult about, there's a lot of things that are difficult about youth homelessness. One of the things is how it's defined. So it is defined differently by different federal and state departments. And so when we say, something simple like, well, how many youth are experiencing homelessness in my community? It's not always easy to get that number because we're not always talking about, like, are we talking about, youth under 18? Are we talking about youth under 25? Are we talking about 14 to 24? And also, young people experiencing homelessness are very smart and street savvy. And we have, those of us in the homelessness services sector and the advocacy and services sector have trouble finding folks. So we know that folks are out there. We know they're experiencing, young folks are experiencing homelessness, but oftentimes that looks a lot different than an adult over 25. So, sometimes young people are out on the street or in encampments. A lot of times they're moving rapidly from place to place. So they might be at home for a little bit. They might be in the car for a night. They might then be at a friend's house for a couple of weeks, and then that doesn't, they can't stay there any longer. So then they're back at home. And so it can be really difficult to find, we have some numbers, but we know that they're undercounts because the outreach into the community is so important to raise the issue and increase visibility of the population of young people experiencing homelessness. Also, it's not a way people define themselves. So you might qualify as experiencing homelessness for a certain type of service, but because you're not in an encampment, because you're not out on the bench, you don't see yourself as qualifying for that program. But if your nightly residence isn't safe and stable, there's probably services that you qualify for, especially if you're a youth or a young adult.
And you're with the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. And that homelessness part we just talked about, but housing's another thing. And someone that saw this story brought up an interesting point to me, which was that they oftentimes see adults that are out on the street, but they don't oftentimes see kids that are out on the street. And so where are we finding a lot of these youth to be staying overnight?
So it depends. So unaccompanied youth, so youth that aren't with their families, they are again bouncing from place to place with a friend in the car, at maybe getting some services, youth, a younger youth that are still with their families, we also don't see as often because maybe grandma says, I'll take the kids because I don't want them out on the, street or in the shelter, but I can't take the whole family. Or, there's different survival and settings that parents have, scenarios that they have in place for their kids. But still, it happens. I mean, whole family sleeping in the car. There's also a lot of effort to hide that because there can be a concern about child welfare involvement or other systems involvement. Families don't want to be separated. And so families get really creative to protect their kids when they're experiencing homelessness for those younger youth that are still with their families.
You had mentioned before that when we're talking about tracking homeless youth, that these counts, they can oftentimes be undercounts. And so in terms of tracking that data, where are the big struggles in actually getting people to self-report that they're homeless?
So I think there's a lot of things we could say. Culturally, I think in the United States, we're very much a culture of perceived self-sufficiency. And so it can be seen as stigmatizing to ask for help. There can be a sense of, I got this. I don't need anybody's help. I don't trust you to provide me with help. A lot of times youth and young adults experiencing homelessness have interacted with systems already. They've interacted with, maybe things at school that didn't go well. Maybe they've had child welfare or, foster care involvement. Maybe they've had juvenile justice involvement. So another agency or person saying, hey, tell me all the tough things you're experiencing and I'm going to help you. It takes a while to like build up that relationship. And that's not always conducive with the types of things we're doing to count folks experiencing homelessness. For example, HUD has communities conduct the one night point in time count, and get counts of people who are out on the street. And it can be very difficult to find young people just on one night to get a scope of, it's a good starting point, but like I said, those numbers would definitely be an undercount, and those definitions too. Again, looking at, we don't have a state definition of youth homelessness in Ohio right now. So there's not a common language that we're gathering around when we're doing counts. And so, in data, those definitions are really important. So I think it's some different factors that come together to make those counts really difficult.
And once relationships are built up with people experiencing homelessness, they feel the trust of these resources. What are the next steps that can be taken to, of course, get them out of the situation they're in, but prevent them from re-entering that situation?
That's a great question. And, housing has to come first, but it's not housing only. So, we're depending on where a youth or young adult is at in terms of their housing crisis. Of course, getting safe and stable housing is a key priority. Getting shelter if it's needed, making sure somebody has a safe place to stay, tonight or for the next span of time while they're working on their other goals. But again, that relationship building and trust has to continue, because the young adults with lived experience that I've talked to have said over and over again that they want to be treated with respect. They want to be treated as experts in their own life and experience. So it's not for me or anyone in an agency to come in and tell someone what their goals should be, so they might have additional supports they want around their health, education, employment, any number of kinds of stabilization goals that can be improved with having safe and stable housing. Because, when you try to do some of that stabilization, when you don't have a safe place to stay, it's very difficult to find success. So longer term services, not everybody needs that. We in the housing world, we talk about progressive engagement and giving folks the level of assistance that they need. But anecdotally, and what I hear from the providers that I work with, is that youth and young adults tend to need more time than an adult over 25 who got behind on rent when they were transitioning jobs. Maybe they just need that deposit and first month's rent and they're like back on their feet, good to go. Great. But a lot of times, like with all these factors we've been talking about that young people have been experiencing, systems involvement, the trauma of the experience of homelessness itself, maybe co-occurring like issues, health issues, mental, physical health issues, then they might need some additional support. And we know that making sure that young people have positive connections is something that's really critical. So we can get you, we find the apartment, we get you in the apartment, we make sure you have all your stuff. It's not the best practice to then just say, well, goodbye and good luck. It's really important. What we call like aftercare in the services world is really important to make sure that a young adult, especially on their own for the first time, maybe as far as being in their own apartment, say, is getting those supports that they need to continue to be comfortable in that unit and be able to maintain it.
Yeah, it really is just the start. And so for people that may be family members of a homeless youth or may work with the homeless youth or just are acquainted to that homeless youth, what role can they take on personally to be just a part of that solution and really support them through that process?
Yeah, so I'll borrow something that has specifically been spoken about in the context of human trafficking, which is a high risk for youth experiencing homelessness. Unfortunately, especially youth that are LGBTQ plus have some increased risks there. But you talk about being a safe adult, so or peer. It doesn't have to be somebody over, 24 or whatever. But like, what am I doing to be trustworthy, to demonstrate that I'm a safe person? Am I following through on what I say? Am I taking the time to build that relationship? Am I listening to this young person? Because they might have something else that's going on that's really important to them at school or in a relationship. And I need to be attentive to that if I want to build an authentic relationship with this person, right? To what's important to them. And then making sure that people get connected with the resources in their own community. Do we have enough youth dedicated resources around the state? Of course not, but we have some. And so it's really important to then get youth and young adults who are experiencing homelessness linked up with whatever might be available in the community to start getting whatever services that they are eligible for.
And how do we advocate to get more services? Because I know people sometimes are intimidated by the idea of writing an elected official or even just doing the research to just know that more are needed. How do we start that?
Oh, it's really so important that direct advocacy with your elected official. We have an advocacy department at Ohio, and they tell us all the time those direct phone calls, those letters, they make a difference. People, I know you've done a lot of speaking with elected officials and the work that you do, and you know that it's important to them to what their constituents are saying and what they're asking for. So definitely that direct outreach to your elected officials is so important. And there are dollars being invested in the state. There's money in the state budget that's sometimes dedicated. We have the Ohio Department of Health Homeless Youth Program. That's a state budget line item. So, that advocacy works to help keep those dollars in the budget and to say, hey, we want to see more of this, and we want to figure out how to get it into our community to help solve this issue that really isn't controversial, that everyone should have a safe and stable place to live, especially youth and young adults.
Oh, sure. And Amanda Wilson from the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. Thanks for joining me and thanks for the work that you're on.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the work you do and you taking the time to talk with me about this, and definitely happy to be a resource to anybody that needs it.
Well, thank you. And that's this week's Community Focus. I'm Jaden Jefferson, and have a great week.